Cortes, the tough adventurer from Spain who conquered Mexico, died an embittered and forgotten man. Hernan Cortes was barely 10 years old when news reached him, his hometown of Medellin in western Spain, that Christopher Columbus had discovered a new world beyond the ocean sea. Everyone was excited by the news, and perhaps Hernan decided to go one day and see the new world for himself. But he was a frail boy then, so frail that his mother, Donna Catalina, was afraid he might die. No one could have guessed that as a man he would become famous for his toughness and his endurance. Still, by the time he was in his teens, he was a healthy, high-spirited boy, much happier on a horse than at his schoolbooks. When he was older, Cortes sometimes boasted that his father, Martin Cortes, was a hidalgo, a nobleman, but the family were never well off, earning their money selling wine, wheat, and honey, and it was clear that Hernan was to have a profession. So at the age of 14 he was packed off to Salamanca to study law, but after 2 years he returned. What Hernan wanted was not the dreary routine of a lawyer, but a life of adventure. His thoughts turned to the new world. Soon he was packing his bags and heading south for Seville, a bustling port where caravels were coming in weekly from the Indies. Hot-headed and headstrong then, Cortes threw himself into the life of the port energetically, and threw himself equally energetically into the arms of the local women. He soon found a place on a boat carrying Nicolas de Ovanda, who was the new governor of Hispaniola, to the New World. But he missed the boat when he injured his leg one night when a wall fell on him as he was escaping from a lady's bedroom. In 1504, when he was 19, he finally reached Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, and was granted land and Indian slaves to work it. He also made the most of his legal training and became a treasury clerk. 7 years later, Cortes joined a force sent to conquer Cuba and settled in the new colony. Cortes became an important man in Cuba, owning rich farmlands and profitable mines, and eventually became mayor of Santiago, the island's capital. Yet despite Cortes's success in Cuba, what he really wanted was to conquer and rule a land of his own. When, in 1518, the governor of Cuba, Velasquez, appointed him to lead an expedition to colonize the mainland, he saw his chance. Spending all his money buying ships and provisions, Cortes prepared for the expedition with remarkable thoroughness, and it became clear that he was an efficient and effective commander. As well as 600 well-trained men, he acquired at great expense 16 horses, creatures entirely unknown to the Indians of the New World, and one of the keys to his success. Seeing all these preparations, Velasquez began to suspect Cortes. Was it Cortes's plan to ignore his authority and set himself up as a ruler in the new colony? As soon as Cortes became aware of Velasquez's suspicions, he acted swiftly. One dark November night, he embarked his troops, emptied Santiago's slaughterhouse of meat, and weighed anchor. Cortes's little force reached the mainland in February 1519, and for the next 6 months worked its way up the Mexican coast. Sometimes the Indians they met were friendly, sometimes hostile, but their horses and cannon terrified the Indians and ensured they won any battle. And Cortes proved cool and adept at winning and exploiting the Indians' respect. From the Indians, he of the great Aztec Emperor Montezuma, the most powerful and feared ruler in Mexico. When messengers arrived from the emperor bearing gifts of gold and precious jewels, Cortes resolved to encounter this mighty leader. With such a tiny army, Cortes knew he must win what he could by strategy and diplomacy rather than by force. But he gained some welcome allies in the Teutonic Indians, who resented the power of the Aztecs. His troops were understandably nervous, though, and might desert at any time. So after building a base town, Vera Cruz, on the banks of the San Juan River, he took the drastic step of sinking all his ships. There was to be no going back. A few days later, Cortes and his men began their epic march inland to conquer Mexico. 2 years later, Montezuma was dead, the Aztecs' power was broken forever, and Cortes was ruler of a vast country. Throughout the conquest, Cortes had written letters to the Emperor Charles V in Europe, and the emperor had been enthralled by all his accounts. In October 1522, Charles V confirmed Cortes as Captain General of Mexico, or New Spain as it was then called. Cortes was held in almost godlike awe by the Indians, and for 3 years he was the splendid and absolute ruler of Mexico. But the glory was not to last. Already the need to reward his followers had forced him, apparently against his will, to introduce the encomienda system, which made virtual slaves of the Indians and was to cause bitter hardship in the centuries to come. Then, in 1524, one of his captains declared himself governor of a colony in the south, Honduras. Outraged, Cortes determined to crush the revolt himself. Cortes was away almost 2 years, facing terrible hardships on his way to Honduras, and by the time he got back, everyone was convinced he had long been dead. New Spain was by then in chaos, and he returned to Mexico City to find another governor in his place. The Indians rejoiced at his return, but despite sailing the Atlantic to plead his case with the emperor, Cortes was never given back the governorship. Bitter quarrels with Spanish officials in Mexico City forced Cortes into retreat in his newly built palace at Cuernavaca, and after a few brave but futile expeditions up the Pacific coast in search of other empires, he sailed forlornly back to Spain. In Europe, he joined the emperor on a disastrous attempt to capture Algiers from the Arabs, and his luck seemed to have run out. The story is told that one day when he saw the emperor in his coach and desperately tried to talk to him, the emperor, who owed half his empire to Cortes, asked coldly, "Who is this man?" and drove on. Cortes died on 2nd of March 1547, almost forgotten by his countrymen, but not by history, for he is remembered as the man who destroyed one civilization and laid the foundations of another.